Today we're going to have a rich conversation that I'm delighted to support, especially considering how timely it is. In an era of rapid technological innovation, changing workforce, evolving demographic trends, AI, and growing public skepticism about the value of higher education and whether it's the sole path to a prosperous future, we seem as though there's a couple different worlds orbiting here, where students are on one planet and universities are on another. And this conversation, we're going to try and navigate how it is we might align those planets, because the folks at GSV gave me the fun title of Aligning the Planets. Students are from Mars, universities are from Venus. So for those of you who remember that book, that's exactly what we're going to talk about. Not just communication, but what actual changes in our relationship, what we do, and how we support each other need to happen in order for students to thrive in the future. So I am delighted to be joined by this distinguished panel. I will first start, because you are so close to me, Michael. I think you can just kick us off with there's a significant number of Americans who now are skeptical about the value of higher education. That is happening while students are obviously experiencing it, and I just want you to go ahead and just jump to the end, which is, what if the naysayers are right? What, in terms of their aspirations, our degrees no longer hold value? Can you respond to that?
Sure, and let me just say that it's always wonderful to be here at a GSV-sponsored event. I love it in part because it allows me to bring home to my wife the best swag, right? It makes me very popular. So thank you, Deborah and Michael. I appreciate you all for the marital equity it provides. So I think a really important place to start is accepting the fact that for a significant number of people, they are right. Right? They are right because it's their perspective, it's their lived experiences. For them, it doesn't add up. And that was an important revelation for us to make at Quinn College as we looked about how we go about creating a national network of urban work colleges. Because we asked ourselves, what is it that people want, that they are saying that they need, that we are not providing? And when you start in that place, and then when you go actually talk to people about it, you realize where the disconnect exists. We haven't necessarily listened and acted with the speed of the marketplace. And because of that, that has allowed this disconnect to take place. Now, the great news is it doesn't have to stay that way. Once you begin actually speaking to the needs, you regain people's trust. So for us, what we discovered was that look, 75, 80% of our students are on Pell Grants. They tend to be traditional students. Their families drop them off and they tell us, this is our dream. The American dream hasn't worked well for our family. This is our first generation college student. We need them to have a career, a job when they graduate. But we also need help as they go through this process. And so providing them with full employment while they are in school was our way of listening to what people said. And it's interesting to see how people have received that. So in summary, I will just say this. One, we have to accept that for some people, they are right because it's their experiences. They're not stupid, they're not misinformed, they're not irrational. They are being honest and they are being real. We then have to respond to that in kind and meet them where they are and lift them to the places where their dreams exist.
Thank you for the start. So we're going to now go to Patrick, so we've just heard, if that's the case, that universities and colleges and higher education as it currently exists needs to evolve. Granted, but if we're talking about the analogy in the title, I want to understand, we're assuming that universities are getting it wrong, but what might students be missing about what's going on, because that miscommunication can exist on both sides. And I'm hoping you can tie in some data that you've brought in from the Value Commission and perhaps help us understand kind of the rest of the landscape here.
Yeah, so I'll start exactly where you left off, which is the listening piece. And we used to have an excuse to not listen. Now there's actually great information and data out there, both empirically and from customer perception, consumer perception on this. Strata's been putting stuff out on this for a long time, Lumina with Gallup, a number of others. And I think what it tells us is a few things. One, it depends on who you're talking to, because I completely agree, Michael, that it depends on which community. If you take even a question as simple as, do you see value in higher education, and you array that from folks who have completed a degree, folks who are current students, some college no degree, and never enrolled, and you see a complete flip in that statistic from 70% saying yes on the first side of that, all the way to the exact opposite on the other. So understanding the nuance of who you're talking to, which communities you're serving, I think is the first part. The second that I'd throw into the mix here is not the divergence of perspectives, where we get into higher education, gets super paternalistic. It's like, oh, well, students, you don't realize that you have a income advantage of $1 million over a lifetime if you get a degree, or look at who lost their jobs first in the Great Recession and who got them back. That divergent point of view is actually not helpful. The convergence is actually, almost if you think about it as an equation of sorts, what's the issue that the students are talking about? They're talking about debt and cost. Because if my aunt is saddled with, $20,000, $30,000 of debt, she can't get a car because of that. Or that's what's proximate to me. It's not this data about $1 million. So if you start there with that negative, and then add the positive that now institutions are finally talking about, which is income. Well, income minus cost gets you into wealth. And this is what Paul Tuff was writing about in the New York Times recently. It is not about completion rates. It is not about income advantage. It is about wealth. And this is where the students are the canary in the coal mine. They're complaining about these things. Everyone's like, oh, no, but there's an income advantage. The difference is the wealth premium is what Tuff referred to, and what the Federal Reserve of St. Louis has been talking about since 2018, and what we anchor the Value Commission on. That premium is decreasing, and that's real. And if we would have listened to our learners, we would have realized that was on the verge, because their information is way faster than waiting for a 10-year lag from the empirical data. And so I think that's a big, big piece. So we can say students don't understand the reality of the empirical piece, but I think that's an issue. Now, present company excluded, in terms of the institutions represented here, you're doing something about that, whether it's formulating your own vision of what that premium needs to look like, what your commitment is at WGU or the work college model. I think that's the important piece. And I might, to take the metaphor just a step further, Bridget, is there's a third planet floating around out there, and it's not Mars and it's not Venus, it's the policymakers. And we could call them Mercury for so many reasons. I won't do it from the astrological reason, which is about rationale and reason, but the mythological one, which is as a translator, is a conveyor of messengers. That was Mercury in Greek and the version Roman mythology. They are translating the best they can what they are hearing from their constituents, right? And their constituents right now are starting to say, 74% at least are saying, if a college is not delivering at least a family-sustaining wage, maybe we should decrease taxpayer funding into those. So that third planet is super, super important, because that is the lifeblood of Title IV receiving institutions. And so I'd say that's a piece that we need to be paying attention to, in addition to the students, in addition to the institutions.
So we understand now that taking the skepticism seriously, understanding a little bit deeper about where it's coming from and where it's justified, but that there's misunderstanding on both sides when we're thinking about students and institutions. But Lisa Gevelber, I want to go to you specifically because Grow with Google, you're the founder. You're doing some really interesting things where you're actually partnering and providing credentials and certificates with WGU, I believe, but you'll clarify. So you come from the technology side of things, and you can view this, whereas the rest of us are in the higher ed space. And I'm just wondering if you can talk about the societal changes and economic development shifts that are impacting what people and employers are thinking about the idea of skills, because that seems to be where we need to go in light of this context here, is moving towards really understanding how we can actually provide skills for people.
Sure. So maybe one bit of context. So we founded Grow with Google to ensure that the opportunities created by technology could truly be available to everyone. And we picked one really big societal problem that we saw, which is about 80% of good-paying jobs in our country, even 80% of jobs that pay more than $35,000 a year, say they require a college degree. But as Mike showed us earlier, only 38% of Americans have a college degree, which essentially means 2/3 of our country are locked out of every good job in our country. And we knew that having a college degree can be life-changing. We just believed at Google that it shouldn't be the only way to change your life. So we focused on skills, as you're saying, Bridget, and we created an alternative pathway where people could get training and a certificate to show that they actually had the skills to do the job. And along the way, we have now graduated about 600,000 people in the last 2 years, many of whom are going from relatively low-wage work into some of the most in-demand, high-paying careers in our country. Cybersecurity, data analytics, IT support, project management, et cetera. But along the way, we discovered something else. Not only were we successfully helping people without college degrees through our partnerships with employers and our ecosystem approach get amazing jobs, but a lot of people who had college degrees were taking our certificates too. And that was a big surprise for us. And we thought, well, that's crazy. Why would anyone do that? But then we went in to learn from the learners, and we dug into some Lightcast data, and we found that people were behaving super rationally. If you complement your degree, especially if you're like me and you have a liberal arts degree, or if you have a humanities degree, with a high-quality, industry-recognized credential, like a Google career certificate, you will become dramatically more employable at significantly higher wages. The data shows that over and over again. So now what we found is we found a way that we can also complement higher ed. So we do work with WGU, but we also work with the entire University of Texas and Texas State system. We work with the community, we work with every single community college in 11 states. And now we're seeing huge uptake in high schools. If 2/3 of kids are not gonna get a college degree, high schools is a great place to teach them incredibly powerful, really important technology skills that'll help them support themselves and their families for the future.
Great. So now we're in the space where we have the context of what's going on nationally and to the sentiment, but then seeing an actual employer stepping into the fray and seeing a place where they're simply not satisfied with what's happening and creating something. And so what I want to understand is, we're not going to try and throw the baby out with the bathwater here. We're actually trying to see a model where there need to be a lot of different approaches to meet the needs of learners. And Scott, because you actually lead an institution that's in the doing stage, you're actually implementing at scale really like innovative approaches to meet the needs of learners. But if you were to talk to other university presidents, which I think there are some in the audience, what can university presidents actually do? What can leaders actually do to change what it is they're doing so that it emerges to meet the needs of this current market and the needs of learners, but also stay somewhat true to their academic mission? Can you talk about that conflict?
I think we can. I would say that one of the things I'd just connect off of what Lisa's saying is that I think we're really pretty simple in our design, and I would offer this to anyone who's leading an institution, which is, what is the job to be done? Meaning, in fact, all these individuals that Lisa referenced at all stages of our life, that we actually need to acquire knowledge, skill, and ability to advance into the next opportunity. The challenge, I think, that most institutional leaders is that they may be coming into an environment that may have lost that core fundamental value proposition. That they've built such an integrated entity with so many different constituents, with so many different interests and so many different, if you will, products and services and offerings, that you kind of have taken your eye off the core thing, which is individuals need to acquire knowledge, skill, and ability to change their lives for the better. And that doesn't happen just once, it happens multiple times in their life. And so I think if there were one thing to do, I would say put the student back at the center of everything that you do. If they are the primary beneficiary of everything that your institution is undertaking, how are you fundamentally delivering on that value proposition that if you acquire this education that we're providing, it will actually help advance you into opportunity so that you can actually change your life for the better. Now, one thing that we also believe that is probably more common with Lisa than most other institutions is, meaning traditional institutions, let me rephrase that, is that we see that happening multiple times, meaning we very clearly said that there are individuals that are rising talent, meaning individuals that are kind of first-time risers into the opportunity. We see those that are stranded talent, these ones that may have degrees or credentials but are actually underemployed. We see those that are advancing talent. They don't have degrees and they don't have credentials, but they're already in pretty high resiliency careers, but they need upward mobility. And then we certainly see those individuals that are always upskilling professionals. Education has a role in all of those. What we do know across that spectrum, though, is back to, I think, Bridget, your question is like, how do you still stay true to something that I never want to underestimate the value of, which is a degree still affords an individual optionality in a way no other thing does. Because it doesn't matter which opportunity, at which stage in your life you're pursuing, if you possess that credential, it still has incredible signaling value. It says one thing that this person does really, really well is learn. They have a capacity for learning and solving the problems and the challenges of the new opportunity they're pursuing. And that is optionality that you want to afford everyone, because that's the one I would say that in a lifetime, it affords an upward traverse like nothing else out there. So even while we're trying to solve the near-term problem, I think a lot of the growth Google certificates are providing and micro-credentials that we're providing, it may get you that first opportunity, but you also need to plan for the next opportunity. And there's something across that traverse that a degree affords a person that nothing else does. So.
Well, so while Michael's responding to a text message, I will shift to, I'm just kidding. He's actually not. He's actually sending me a message right now, what he wants to say. No, Patrick, I actually wanted to jump to you because I think one last piece that's pretty important is actually talking about what's going on with the public and the skepticism that's growing. I know that you touched briefly on it, but I want to understand, most of this conversation has thus far been about the relationship between universities and students and doing a better job. But all of this is happening with a backdrop of the public, like 56% don't think that a degree is worth it. And the traditional response that I see from university leaders is, nuh-uh. Nuh-uh, my graduates do great. This very defensive, very individual, there's no collective leadership across the sector on this and being actually responsive. And I don't see leaders actually listening, hearing that skepticism and actually responding to it, you know, admitting that perhaps we might be wrong. And so I'm just wondering what you think needs to happen to actually address that challenge, not just changing what we're doing, but we actually probably need to talk differently and listen differently to the public. And I'm hoping from your landscape of the director of post-secondary for Gates that you can give us that inspirational perspective.
Well, first, the catalyst is going to be coming to the institutions very, very soon. People are no longer satisfied with anecdotes. So the data piece of this is real, and it's bipartisan. The College Transparency Act continues every single year to grow with folks signing on both parties. One of the few things you can actually see. The holdup is a technical thing out of committee, and we won't get into that, but that will happen. It's happening in states. The transparency is coming, and so no longer will institutional leaders be able to say, or just avoid it. I think they're going to need to get out there and shape what the reality is. So one of the things with the Value Commission is we started taking a look at different ways to talk about economic mobility or value add, et cetera. And there's a big piece that we need to shape together from an equity perspective, which is how does that play out serving certain student populations or from institutions that have been historically underfunded since their creation. So I think the data is coming that will no longer allow people to say, nuh-uh. How we shape that story collectively as a society is super important, I think. The second thing on the messaging piece, so forgive me, I'm a recovering management consultant, so I think in 2x2s. And if you think about value in two dimensions, one is the economic gains and the other is the non-economic gains. And the other dimension, the x-axis, is private, so accruing to the individual versus societal. There are a lot of institutions that think they're allowed to still play in the public non-economic square. They can't. They have lost the right to play in that square. If you do not live into, Scott, what you said, playing into the private pecuniary gain, the advancement opportunity, the optionality for citizens, you don't get to play in the other squares. And I think that's like a fundamental problem with our rhetorical interface with policymakers right now, is we have to nail the basics, and you can use a Maslow, analog or whatever. We have to nail the basics because these other squares are super important. I don't want to live in a society that doesn't see some of the non-private, non-financial gains. That's a society I want to be a part of. That society votes more frequently. That society has better health care. That society has better, stronger families. Like, I want those things, but we can't get there without nailing the first piece. And so I think when I'm in conversation with institutional leaders, it's to say, I am with you, all of those things matter, and we have to nail this first part.
Okay, I want to go about cost really quickly, and Scott and Michael, I'm going to go to you. You both have implemented really big changes that the traditional model of higher ed has been reticent to adopt. They have, held firm to the foundation they have. But I'm wondering if you could just, each of you, identify something you actually believe that they could do, that they are not doing to address the cost issue, because student debt is a serious issue, and the blame shifting isn't helpful. So, but as someone, you got rid of football and you turned your football field into a sustainable garden and solved a food desert. You've shifted the way that you deliver online. You work with Minerva. What kinds of things do you think you call BS on the idea that other institutions can't adopt it?
So I think fundamentally part of the issue is that we see universities as the domain of the faculty. I think they're actually the domain of the students and their families. And so, first of all, you have to shift the way that you look at the entity itself. When you do that, you then become open to actually talking to the students and their families. Every innovation that we have had has come from sitting down with our students and our parents, asking them, what is important to you? What do you need? So one thing that people could do, that anyone could do, is create systems which allow you to regularly poll your students and their families, right? Just regularly be able to elicit information from them outside of, you have to pay this much amount of money to go to school. And we'll listen to you complain about it for a little while, but you're still gonna have to pay. Our students, we started out thinking we had good plans, and then we asked the students, and they said, it's okay, but this is what's really my issue. And it was uncomfortable, because it was completely opposite of where we had planned to go. When our families told us, and when the employers told, because that's the other piece of it, we regularly polled the employers. We said, what is it that you need students to be able to do? They told us they need to be able to write well, speak persuasively, work in teams, and have digital competencies beyond Snapchat, Instagram, and Twitter, all right? So every class now requires students to demonstrate competencies in those 4 areas, every single one. The other thing that I think is super important is this credentialing piece. We have 4 pillars of our education. 1 is what you major in, 2 is your work-study experience. The 3rd is something called PQCX, which requires every single student to get 3 credentials before they graduate, right? So every year you are required to get a certificate, an industry-recognized certificate. We think of it a little bit differently, though, because this goes back to how I think, higher ed, articulates things. The certificates are now the graduate degrees, right? That's how we view them at our school. So it's no different. I was a government major. I have 3 certificates. I have a master's in public policy, I have a law degree, and I have a doctorate, right? Now, we don't like to think of certificates that way, but they are industry-recognized credentials that allowed me to be able to effectively navigate a shifting economic landscape and professional landscape. It's the same thing, although much less expensive, right? And so every university could make it possible for their students to have those things, and they should. Those would be the things that I think they should.
I asked for 1, and that was a lot of things, and I like that. I like that about you.
I had to make up for the fact
it was like from improv. You were
chastised me.
yes-anding.
Right.
Scott, can you give us something, especially serving how many students now? 100,000?
I'll give you one really simple one that still shocks us at WGU, which is technology is an incredible thing, that it increases productivity and output at an accelerated, amplified rate. It is amusing to us to see institutions write about how much more expensive or equally expensive it is to develop online learning. And I'm sitting there going like, are these the smart people who are trying to figure out how to apply technology? Because that is the antithesis of everything that technology actually enables. There is certainly some promising things, but it is absurd to think that in leveraging the internet, the greatest single way to democratize access to education, that somehow institutions are figuring out a way to make that as expensive as if they were paying for everything integrated into the value proposition of being in person. I do not understand that to save my life. Anytime I hear someone try to explain why it's so expensive, I'm talking to the wrong person, because it's not that expensive, and it is certainly a way by which you can dramatically expand enrollment in higher education, meaning 50% more, 100% more. You could actually have 30 million people, 40 million people enrolled in post-secondary programs, leveraging technology in a way that never have we seen that opportunity before the internet. And I understand why states built so many community college campuses, everything else, but that is an easy, simple way by which you can bend the arc of the cost curve in education, and no one is taking advantage of it. Why? Because they're not focused on students, they're actually focused on their institution and the faculty and the preservation of some community value proposition, et cetera, that diverts their attention away from the student. The second simple thing I would say, that I don't know why 2 centuries after we moved beyond an agrarian economy that we still have a semester term structure of fall, winter, spring. Like, if there were ever a sector that had a license to basically say, we're going to build all this stuff and have no more than 50% utilization of it. Like, what industry can survive on that kind of economic model? It is absurd. And so I'm certainly compelled by the fact that places like BYU Idaho basically said, you know what, we're going to pretty much have year-round enrollment. You can still follow term structures and be compliant with regulation, legislation, everything else, but we're going to utilize our facilities at 100% rather than at 60 or so % a year. It is so weird to me that we invest that kind of money. And particularly if you look at public institutions in the state of Utah, it's shocking to me as a taxpayer in the state of Utah that the institution has to go get the funding to build the building, but then the taxpayers pay for the maintenance for that for life. That utilizes at 25% because those offices aren't being used, the classrooms aren't being used, everything else, and you're like, that is the worst economic value proposition that we've never actually been sold. That we actually just got compelled to do it because that's what taxpayers do. It is a weird thing that we're stuck in that is 2 centuries old and could easily be changed. You just have to have the force of will to do it.
So, perfect. So there are things that we can do to actually change. There are institutions who are changing. There are justified reasons why the perception gap between these entities is there, and it's about shifting our priorities and centering the needs of students. But Lisa, I'm hoping that you can round the bases for us on AI, in that a lot of people are very negative about what it's going to do to jobs and to what it is, what are the workforce, and therefore it's hard for us to make decisions in the future. But I believe that you are optimistic about what's going to be happening, and that this is an opportunity for the both and approach instead of just getting rid of degrees. But I'm just hoping you can speak to that.
Sure. I think especially in education environments, AI is a hot topic, largely around people getting extremely worried about cheating and homework. And for sure, those are both a problem. But I also think there's another side to that coin, which is when you use AI, you can start to teach people in the way that they learn best. You can teach quantum mechanics through sports analogies. You just ask the machine to do it that way. And it's super interesting to think about in a world where you can teach everyone in the way they learn best, and there really is more personalized learning, how much more we can all learn. And I think there's a lot of power in that is yet to be discovered by all of us. I also think we're learning a lot as we've begun our journey in AI at Google. And I was talking to one of the product managers on BARD the other day, and he was sharing some stories about some of his favorite learning so far. And he told me this story about a neurodivergent learner who had gone to Bard and entered an email that he was hoping to send to someone. And he asked Bard whether the email might make someone angry. And then he asked Bard to help him fix the email so it wouldn't make someone angry. It's this very powerful tool to help us all not just be more productive or more creative, but in some ways, maybe even connect better with each other. So I think there are things like homework that need to be figured out, but there are also amazing things that people will be able to do with this technology that we haven't even thought about yet.
So this is now a chance for you all to put them in the hot seat. If you have questions, I'm open for Q&A. And until I get my first question, I want a quick rapid fire. If there's one thing that you, and I really mean you got to stick to one change that would make the biggest difference in bridging the gap between what students want and what traditional higher education institutions offer. And Patrick. One thing?
Yeah, sorry, starting to live into Michael's no silver bullet comment earlier. For a proxy for student centricity, learner-employer records, because it forces a type of student centricity if they own the information about their experiences.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Michael, can you build on that one thing?
Adequate funding for students so that when they want their records, schools don't have to withhold them because they owe the institutions money.
I would probably anchor on skills, which is I think you should have to prove the relevancy and value of the credentials that you're providing students. And if you can't articulate it in the skills that are relevant to the work, then why are you offering it? A credential with no market value is a scam.
Snap. I feel like people want to. Lisa?
More work experience, more credit for work experience.
Okay. Excellent. And now we have our first candidate to ask a question. Please stand, sir.
Hello? Yeah, well, Bridget, everyone, thank you. My question is going to be about the frontier of best practice. And I think I'll just address a version of that question to you, Patrick, and to you, Scott. So, Patrick, can you talk about a state or some states where, in your opinion, state policymakers are already in that quadrant that you talked about of trying to measure accurately and fairly economic gains to students and in creating policy and accountability around it? I know that the Value Commission has done a lot of work in Texas, for example, but talk to us a little bit about where you see a state on the cutting edge of getting to this future. And Scott, for you, the parallel question is, with your team, you've electively gone down this road. No accreditor, no policymaker has required you to measure economic returns to your students, but you're doing everything you can to do that anyway. Can you talk about the benefits of that and also some of the limits you're running into in getting wage data, for example, to be able to measure fairly and then respond to it? Thank you.
Did you say state?
Yeah, a state, yeah. Exactly, right? Talk to us like where is an example of a state or two where you think they're furthest along into this world?
Yeah, I mean, no doubt I would put Texas in the front running position there. You know, even you look at legislation they passed this year, which is tying that kind of economic mobility piece to institutional funding and some funding to set up institutions to get there. That's the other piece, changing the game on that funding without providing a little bit of a glide path to get there, I think is like pulling the rug out from under institutions that have been there for some time. I would say paying attention there. Now, they started with data, right? So if you look at University of Texas, they had a pilot with Census to bridge some of their education data and federal data that they already have, but to bridge that, to start asking the right questions. Now, they're asking really, really important questions about value. They're asking about equitable value. Yes, Texas is asking about equitable value. Maybe it's playing out in a different way than some people think from policymakers, but they're looking at what is happening to specific degrees with by gender, by race, by original income. And so I would point to that. I mean, I would also just say briefly, you know, let's occasionally take a look outside of our states. You know, when you look at how a place like Switzerland looks at apprenticeship models, and you look at the percentage of families who are excited to send their kids into apprenticeship programs, it's virtually the same across income levels. right? That tells you something. Is, here in the States, it's like, well, but would you send your kid to that's actually what is happening there. So what is it that they're doing? And it's not just about the data, it is about the expectations across multiple types of value. So I'd also ask us to occasionally take a look outside of our own country for some models there.
To your question, I think the first thing that we did at WGU is we just got really comfortable with the fact that there is an economic value proposition of education, and that if that's the primary one, especially considering at least 3/4 or more of all students who say they pursue it to get a great job. I mean, they themselves are already starting with an economic utility maximization kind of argument. So that if that's actually the case, that we at WGU committed to actually holding ourselves accountable to that, and there's real benefits to it, because you start to actually look at, one, first and foremost, are you developing credentials and all the skills associated with them that are relevant to the opportunity? And what is the economic return of that? Absent the cost, you're just saying, what's the economic value of that? And there are a lot of spaces, by the way, in which institutions actually develop really expensive products for not a very good economic return. And so you have to understand that. And there are many different ways to actually telegraph individuals into those jobs that shouldn't require a post-secondary fully integrated degree value proposition, a la what Lisa was sharing. So that was the first thing, but you have to get really good data about that. There's benefits from Lightcast and a ton of others, that Department of Labor data. But then we started specifically trying to get data about our actual graduates in the programs that came from WGU. And so we partnered with the likes of Equifax, with PayScale, others. We're also a huge proponent of the College Transparency Act that Patrick referenced as well, because you can get direct anonymized data of individuals and their income gains relative to the program at WGU. Now, we obviously operate at a much larger scale, so it's pretty easy to anonymize that data, but now we know the economic return, and that forcing us to look at the cost, so that we know that we have to, at a minimum, have a 10x return for any program that we offer at WGU. And if we aren't getting that at our current tuition rate, guess what we do? We lower the cost. We don't sit there and go, well, we got to then only focus on credentials that have higher value. We focus on lowering the cost, so we have differential pricing. And so our tuition cost is not the same across all of our programs. Now, that is a heck of a challenge, because there are certain states, again, like Texas and others, who are starting to provide economic data and outcome data that you can actually correlate back to your students in your programs. But there's no federal effort to do this, really. You have to scrape and crawl and do tons of work to actually get that data. Now, at our scale, we're operating it that way, and so we believe that we can prove it, and that's what we're trying to do.
Yep. So quick that it'll make your head spin, though, because we have less than a minute. Okay. All right. Well, I mean, now we're on the edge of our seat. Please join me in thanking our guests. I feel like they've given us a robust perspective on what we're wrestling with.